This is really bad.
He felt the hard floor against his cheek and realized that he had collapsed onto his face. His strength was completely gone, and he had already lost sensation in his fingers. The heat from his core was so excruciating it made him want to tear his throat out.
Hot, 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 hot.
The moment he opened his mouth to scream, what spilled forth was no shriek. It was a clump of blood. He vomited up large quantities of his lifeblood as he coughed. Frothy blood started forming up at the corners of his mouth as he gurgled. With his dim field of view, the ground had been dyed red.
This is all my blood.
There was enough to soak his fallen body. Blood compromises about 8% of the human body, and it is said that losing about a third of that would be life-threatening, but it seemed to him that he'd already lost just about all of it. He had stopped vomiting blood, but the heat that felt as though it would incinerate him still persisted. He moved his hand toward his abdomen with great difficulty. Having felt an impossible sensation there, he understood.
My stomach's been torn open, huh?
It was no wonder he felt so hot. It seemed his brain had confused pain for heat. He was almost torn in half. Only a bit of skin at his back held him together. In short, it seemed that this was checkmate for him. The moment he realized this, his consciousness started fading. Even the heat, which was making him writhe in agony, had disappeared. Even the unpleasant feeling of blood and the sensation in the hand he'd used to feel his organs, it was all fading away along with his consciousness. All that was left was his body, which would not be able to accompany his soul. The body used the last of his disappearing consciousness to move just a little. It turned its head upward. Black shoes formed ripples in the pool of blood before his eyes. There was someone there, and that someone was most likely the one who killed him. Strangely, he didn't feel like looking at their face. This person was the one who took his life, and yet he still simply decided to remain a spectator to his own demise. He had no clue who they were, but right now, he didn't really care about that. He only wished for the girl's safety.
Subaru?
He felt like he heard a voice like the chime of a bell. He was beyond the point where even he could differentiate his senses, so he probably just imagined it. Despite that, even supposing it wasn't real, he found it extremely comforting. So, a short scream, and then the carpet of blood welcomed yet another person. She had fallen right next to him, exactly where his arm was. Her fair hand dropped powerlessly and intertwined with his. Probably just a coincidence. He felt her fingers move slightly, as if squeezing his hand.
Wait!
He forced his disappearing consciousness to return for a moment. The pain and the heat, everything had faded away. It was a meaningless effort, nothing but a loser wasting time. But even so,
I will definitely save you!
at that moment, Natsuki Subaru lost his life.
This is really bad.
Lost and penniless, those few words were all he could think of. Well, penniless wasn't quite right. He did have his wallet in his pocket, and setting aside the fact that he had an abundance of small change and very few notes, it couldn't be denied that he had assets on him. More than enough to go to the nearest mall to do some shopping and eat some lunch. Even so, he could only be called penniless.
Looks like the currency around here is completely different after all.
Flipping the rare rich 10-yen coin he was holding, the youth sighed deeply. He was an unremarkable youth bearing short black hair and average stature. He had some muscularity, which combined with his cheap jersey gave off the air of an athlete. His sharp eyes were his only noteworthy feature, and even now they drooped helplessly. The banality of his appearance was such that one could instantly lose him in a crowd. However, the gazes directed at him were those of wonder and incomprehension, as though they were looking at something strange. Obviously, there wasn't a single person sporting black hair or a jersey among those looking at him. Their hair varied extensively: blonde, white, brown, green, blue, and so on. Furthermore, their outfits were armor, dancer's clothes, monotone robes, and more which possessed a certain vibe. The youth could only cross his arms in comprehension as their brazen gazes washed over him.
So basically, it's like that, huh?
Snapping his fingers, he pointed to those who were staring at him.
Seems I've been summoned to another world.
Before his eyes was a carriage drawn by a massive lizard-like being. Natsuki Subaru was born in Heisei-era's Japan pressure-free education system. He had lived 17 years, and to describe his life would take 17 years in itself. Setting that aside, his present situation could simply be described as high school, third-year shut-in, or in more detailed terms, a piece of trash who disregards everything, even his parents, to shut himself in his shell even with his entrance exams right around the corner. There was no particular reason for his solitude. On typical weekdays, he would occasionally think getting up now would be a pain, and that became an impetus to cut school. With his absences steadily increasing, before he'd realize it, he'd become an exemplary shut-in who brought tears to experience. He spent his days in sloth, plunging ever deeper into the net with minimal communication.
The result being a summons to another world. I don't really get it myself.
Reconfirming his surroundings again, he heaved his upteenth sigh. He had moved from the street he was on, and was presently sitting somewhere in a dim alley. The ground was paved, a rough job compared to modern Japan, but it wasn't bad.
Supposing this is a parallel world fantasy, I guess this must be the standard medieval civilization. I didn't see any machinery, and they build with stone and wood.
He thought back to the sights he'd seen on his way to the alley and organized the information in his head. He would frequently let his imagination run wild. As a result, he was more than prepared for his present situation. First, calmly analyze that time period's culture and differences with Japan. As certain any differences in the laws of physics and possibility of contact with humanoid organisms, these were his priorities.
Alright, let's do this. I'm not imagining you guys, and I'm fairly certain about the level of civilization. It seems like my money won't be of any use, but I took the opportunity to speak to a shopkeeper, and we had no problem communicating.
Upon realizing he'd been summoned, the first thing Subaru did was attempt to negotiate with a grocer. Having attempted to purchase the apples with his Japanese yen, he was promptly denied. It seemed that this world used gold, silver, and copper as its coins of currency. The inherent value of this currency in this world was easy to understand, certainly befitting a parallel world fantasy.
Well, I suppose there would be mixed metal fakes. Something like a 501 coin would probably degrade, though.
Probably heavy to carry around, he thought, as another lizard-drawn carriage passed through the street. This produced a giant cloud of dust, and yet the townsfolk paid no mind to it, as though they were completely used to this.
Even so, they don't seem nearly as common as cars were. Come to think of it, I haven't seen any dogs or cats around here.
The lizards drawing the carriages appeared considerably larger than horses. Their body mass seemed constant relative to their proportions, but it was certainly worrying to see reptiles of that size.
They're commonplace, huh? Both lizards and humanoids.
Then, the final piece he had to confirm, the unique looks of this world's humans. They possess very colorful hair, but one could easily obtain any hair color with a dye. For a parallel world fantasy, that was nothing extraordinary. Instead, Subaru focused on their animal ears. At a curious glance, he spotted dog ears, cat ears, perhaps even bunny ears, and he may have even caught the sight of a lizard man-like being. There were those who also looked no different from Subaru, which led him to conclude,
the genre is parallel world fantasy. The culture is that of your typical medieval civilization. Demi-humans are common, so battle and adventure might be common as well. The animals show some minor changes, but they basically serve their functions. Is that how it is?
Having deduced that, Subaru exhaled a long breath that wasn't quite a sigh. Having spoken of the circumstances he ended up in, he knit his brows at the seemingly convenient development. If things proceeded according to his fantasies, he'd freely use his modern knowledge to obtain a credible power. However, this world was slightly different from what he had planned for.
I'd run perfect simulations of the Sengoku era. If I'd ended up there, I'd have seized the country from Nobunaga.
When it came to a parallel world fantasy, at best his knowledge was amounted to gunpowder production, and even that was meaningless considering this world's technological level parallel world fantasy generally came with magic. If that were the case, it would probably make gunpowder little more than fireworks.
Well, there's also cliches where magic isn't the end-all be-all. If I ever get the opportunity to contribute to the advancement of science, I'll do my best to. First, my current problem.
He had no clue how or why he'd been summoned here. He clearly remembered what he was doing prior to the summoning. He had just gone out for the first time in a long time to buy some copper emerald at the convenience store and was about to return home. He didn't want to use his bicycle, so he went on foot. Midway, he looked up at the night sky and thought, "It's almost a full moon tonight, huh?" And then as he looked down and blinked, it was noon. Night to noon in an instant. He immediately realized something was off, but that was it. He'd calmed down now, But immediately after the summoning, his panic was such that it could be told for generations to come.
Considering I being an only child have gone missing, those generations might not exist.
As he muttered this, he once again checked his belongings. In a parallel world fantasy, starting gear was even more important than he imagined. He'd need everything he had, however little. First, his cell phone with a dying battery, his wallet containing many video rental membership cards, the ramen he brought from the convenience store, shoyu tonkotsu, some snacks, corn pottage flavored, his beloved gray jersey, unwashed, worn out sneakers of 2 years, and more.
That's that, huh? Why didn't I at least carry a pistol? What do I do now?
It seemed only his snacks would prove useful, and only to fill his belly.
The situation is hopeless, and of course I don't know the source. I don't even have any memories of passing through a mirror or hopping in a pond. Most importantly, where's the beauty who summoned me?
The heroine's absence, by 2D standards, was an act of inconceivable negligence. To summon him and just leave him like that, it was as though he was simply thrown away. In truth, Subaru could no longer escape reality. Now that he'd assessed the situation, he could only hang his head in despair.
Oh, give me a break already! What on earth am I supposed to do here?
Subaru was already at his limits as he muttered complaints. He earnestly wanted to go back. Fantasy was best left in the realm of fantasy. It was fun to imagine arriving in another world to obtain incredible power, but to actually end up in such a situation? What could he really do?
For now, what's important is survival. But, will my level 1 communication ability be enough?
Aside from his family, he'd only really spoken to store clerks. He'd lived this lifestyle for almost a year now, and had long forgotten how to navigate social interactions.
Even though I can type at speaking speed in online chats.
Subaru moved his fingers nervously as he contemplated his future in despair. However, his expression changed when he heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the alley. He looked up to see 3 men blocking the exit. The men gazed at him with sworn contempt as Subaru appraised them. They appeared to be in their mid-20s. Their clothes were filthy, and it was just as though their inner evil had manifested on their faces. They weren't subhuman, but they couldn't be called decent humans either.
Damn, a compulsory event.
Facing the grinning men, Subaru wiped his face and stood up in a panic. They were clearly bandits, and considering the state of the world, they might even take his life. Mission 1, repel the bandits, had begun. The clear condition was eliminating them, and the failure condition was probably his death. Subaru smacked his cheeks and ignored the chill running up his spine. He had to get serious. Hesitation could cost him his life. He at least had confidence in his decisiveness.
Furthermore, this is another world. Considering the typical pattern, I might be super strong here. Something like the gravity being 1/10 of what it was, or, come to think of it, my body feels light. Maybe I can win!
He's murmuring something. Maybe he doesn't get what's going on. Should we teach him?
Unlike Subaru, the men remained fairly calm. However, Subaru continued to face them without backing down.
Whoa there! You guys won't be so calm for long. Let me warn you, guys like me fantasize about this sort of thing all the time. I'll beat the crap out of you and turn you into XP.
I have no clue what you're saying, but you're going to die for mocking us.
That's my line!
With that declaration, Subaru launched his preemptive attack before they could react. He flew into one of them with a full-bodied right straight. He landed a direct hit on the leader's face with such force that his front tooth cut Subaru's hand. He'd hit someone for the first time, and it was much more painful than expected. This was all he tried in his simulations, but it was his first time actually doing it. The man he hit fell to the ground and stopped moving. Driven by emotion, Subaru immediately lunged at another man who was still in shock.
Eat this! A high kick forged by after-bath stretches!
Ugh!
His foot drew a right arc into the man's temple and slammed him into the wall. Having knocked the second person out, Subaru started to believe he was invincible due to his unexpectedly competent performance.
Looks like this world is set to raise my power after all. With all this adrenaline, I can definitely win.
Filled with courage, Subaru turned to the last man as he prepared to take him out. However, the glint of the knife in his hand caused Subaru to prostrate himself on the spot.
I'm sorry, it was all my fault! Please forgive me, spare me!
He surrendered on his knees, the greatest and lowest representation of Japanese spirit. His earlier excitement had completely disappeared. Subaru felt his blood run cold as he tried his very best to beg for mercy with his head on the ground. After all, he had no chance against a blade. If he were cut, he'd be finished. Skill didn't matter when it came to a knife-wielding opponent. He then realized the two who were supposed to be down were also getting back up. They nursed their bleeding noses and shook their heads dizzily, but otherwise seemed fine.
Huh? How come my perilous attacks failed? Where's the power I'm supposed to have?
What sort of crap are you spouting? How dare you do that to us?
They stomped his head into the ground, causing his forehead to bleed as it scraped against the road. Subaru desperately curled up as they continued to pile on, blow after blow.
This is bad. It hurts like hell. I might actually die for real.
They showed no mercy whatsoever, and unlike his old world, there's no guarantee they'd spare his life. There was a strong possibility that he'd be tortured to death like this. Perhaps he should have fought, prepared to die an honorable death. But that was no longer a possibility considering his injuries. Even so, he couldn't just die like that.
Don't move, fool!
Oh, hurts!
The moment he tried to get up, they crushed his hands underfoot and he could only scream in agony. The man turned red with rage and sent spit flying as he yelled. He then held the knife in an underhand grip.
We'll kill you and take everything you have. That's what you get for messing with us.
If it's valuables you're after, it's useless. You see, I'm completely broke.
His mind started drifting in an attempt to escape reality as he looked at the knife which could tear into him at any moment. He wasn't seeing any lights, nor did the world slow down. His life would simply end just like that.
Hey, move! You're in my way!
An exasperated voice rang out as someone ran into the alley. The startled men looked up at the intruder, and Subaru attempted to do as well, though he couldn't move. A beautiful girl crossed his field of view. Her frame was small, and she possessed shoulder-length blonde hair which fluttered into the wind. Her eyes suggested a strong will, and her fang-like canine protruded mischievously. She looked rather cheeky, but it could be said that she was cute considering her age. The shabbily dressed girl had just come across the scene of a genuine mugging. The seemingly deliberate timing caused hope to well up within Subaru. This was it. This was the development he was waiting for. Following the typical pattern, this girl would gallantly save Subaru, who was on the verge of death. And then...
Man, this is crazy. But I'm busy. Gotta get out of here. Live strong.
What? Seriously?
However, that fleeting hope was crushed. Their eyes met momentarily as she raised her hand apologetically as she continued to run past them in what seemed to be a dead end. She then proceeded to leap off a leaning board and rapidly disappeared up the wall. With the girl gone, the alley naturally went silent. She'd gone by like a typhoon, leaving them dumbfounded. But Subaru's circumstances hadn't changed one bit.
Now that the mood's been lightened, I don't suppose that you might let me go?
On the contrary, we're even angrier. You're not going to die a peaceful death, you know.
The man with the knife looked serious. Subaru realized that he was finished for sure this time. His hands were still trapped under their heels. It was too late to attempt to get up. Ultimately, despair conquered his heart.
It's over? Just like that? In a place like this? It's true I haven't lived very virtuously. Even so, a death like this is just too cruel. If I were to ask what I did, the reply would be that I did nothing at all. A completely idle demise.
Pain, wasn't it? There was something else causing him to tear up. It wasn't like something like the fear of the end. He just couldn't bear having lived such an empty, meaningless life.
That's enough, villains.
A clear voice rang through the alley, overpowering the noise of violence, the men's vulgar jeers, and even Subaru's own ragged breaths. Time itself stopped. A phrase reserved for moments like this. At the entrance to the alley stood a single girl. She was a beautiful girl. She had tied up her long silver hair, which reached her hips. Her piercing gaze was brimming with intelligence. Her soft features were both seductive and youthful, and she exuded an air of nobility that was dangerously charming. She stood about 160 centimeters tall. Her royal blue-toned garments weren't particularly flashy, and yet their simplicity emphasized her presence even further. The one conspicuous feature was the emblem on her coat, a bird resembling a hawk. Even its magnificence was nothing more than a supplement to her sublime beauty.
I won't let you run amok like that. Stop at once.
She spoke once again, her voice so exciting it could send tremors through one's body. Her voice was like a silver bell. It was pleasant to the ears, and her speech held such power it could shake one's heart. Subaru was overwhelmed, to the extent he'd completely forgotten his predicament. He could only think of her. The bandits were no different. Faced with her animosity, their earlier vigor had vanished. Even the man holding the knife turned pale as they retreated into the alley.
Wait. Please wait. We don't really get it. But we'll let him go. So please, forgive us.
It's good to see you're so gracious. It's not too late, so return what you stole.
It was our bad. What we stole.
Please, it's really important. I'd let go of anything else but not that. If you return it now, I'll spare your lives.
Though her words were only of that of an entreaty, the last few were clearly filled with anger. Her gaze was sharp, and the hand she had extended as though it was reaching out was empty. However, there was something hard to put into words gathering in her palm, something everyone there could feel.
Wait, perhaps there's been some kind of mistake?
What?
They pointed to Subaru, who was still under their boots.
You're not here to save that guy, right?
What strange clothes he's wearing. Perhaps there's been some internal strife among you? I can't say I approve of you ganging up on him like that, but if you were to ask whether or not I have any sort of connection to him, I'd have to say I don't.
Perhaps thinking they were trying to distract her, her tone was one of irritation. Seemingly flustered by this, the men started talking in a hurry.
Whoa, wait. If you don't want this guy, we have nothing to do with each other. About whatever was stolen from you. It was probably that girl from earlier.
Right. The girl from earlier. She ran up the wall onto the roof.
Yeah, over there. She's probably 3 streets away by now.
As they gave their rapid-fire explanations, her eyes met Subaru's. Her eyes seemed to ask if they were telling the truth, and Subaru nodded instinctively, unable to lie. Having seen this, the girl reluctantly nodded in understanding.
It looks like you weren't lying, so she went that way. I'll have to hurry.
She turned her back on them, prepared to leave. The men were blatantly relieved, and Subaru cursed his own foolishness for getting wrapped up in the atmosphere and squandering his only chance. However,
Be that as it may, I can't overlook what's going on here.
she turned around with her palm facing them and aimed the rock in her palm at the stockman as she fired. Its speed would fit in right at any major league, and its course was that of a beanball. The sound of a regulation ball striking flesh ran out thrice, and the men were blown away as they screamed in pain. Having scored direct hits on the men, there was a high-pitched din as lumps of ice fell by Subaru. Lumps of ice, the size of a fist. Their existence defied any sense of season and even physics itself, as they dispersed as if consumed by the atmosphere once they served their purpose.
Magic?
The word most suited to explain this phenomenon immediately spilled out of his mouth. He didn't hear her chant or anything, but that ice just now was definitely formed in and fired from her palm. Having seen this actually occur before him, he realized something.
This isn't nearly as fantastic as I thought. It feels disappointingly real.
He'd imagined light scattering around or energy flowing wildly, but in reality, it was just some lumps of ice rapidly coming into existence and disappearing just as quickly. There wasn't even the slightest hint of atmosphere to it.
You've really gone and done it now.
Setting aside Subaru's impressions, the men who had been hit by the disappointingly real attack had sustained serious damage. 2 of them could barely keep their footing steady as they stood back up, and the third may have been hit in a bad spot because he was out cold. Despite their bleeding, the 2 who were still standing appeared ready to fight. Even the man beside the guy with the knife was holding an object resembling a rusty nata as he prepared for battle.
I don't give a damn whether you're a mage or whatever. The 2 of us, together, are going to kill you. You think you can win against both of us?
The man with the knife raised his voice in anger as he pressed down on his broken nose with his other hand, but the girl showed no signs of faltering.
I suppose 2-on-1 might be unfair.
Then 2-on-2 should be okay, right?
Yet another voice filled the alley, androgynous and high-pitched, as though speaking for the girl. Subaru started looking around in surprise, and the men shared his reaction. They couldn't find anyone who might have spoken those words. Not at the entrance, and of course not within the alley. The 3 of them were confused and bewildered, and as if to show off, the girl held out her hand. Her palm faced upward, and it floated above her white fingertips.
It's kind of embarrassing to be looked at like this.
It said as it bashfully groomed its face, it being a cat small enough to fit in a palm, standing upright. Its coat was gray and its ears were floppy. To Subaru, it looked very much like an American Shorthair. Well, setting aside its pink nose and the length of its tail, The sight of this bizarre cat-like being caused the man with the knife to tremble as he screamed.
A spirit user?
Correct. If you withdraw right now, I won't pursue you. Think fast. I don't have time for this.
The men clicked their tongues at her words and started to carry out their fallen friend out of the alley. As they passed by Subaru and approached the exit, they glanced back at the girl and...
Just you wait, you damn brat. You best be careful the next time you decide to wander around here.
If you lay a finger on her, you'll be tormented until the end of time. You'll be in the afterlife well before that, though.
They desperately tried to make threats, but the reply was dismissive in tone, although its contents were rather severe. The cat in her palm behaved rather frivolously, but their faces turned paler than ever before as they silently fled out the alley. Now that they were gone, only Subaru remained before her.
Don't move.
Forgetting the pain coursing through him, Subaru had tried to get up to thank her, but she stopped him in his tracks, her ice-cold voice devoid of any sentiment. Her eyes were filled with caution. Even having understood Subaru wasn't with them, she clearly didn't think of him as a good person. Despite this, he was enthralled by the beauty of her amethyst eyes. He wasn't used to dealing with beautiful women, so that alone caused him to turn red and avert his eyes. Seeing this, the girl smiled boldly as she maintained her cautious gaze.
Your guilty conscience made you avert your eyes. Looks like my judgment was spot on.
I wonder. I didn't sense any malice whatsoever. That was probably just an instinctive male reaction.
You be quiet, Puck. You probably know who stole my insignia, right?
The girl silenced the cat as she tossed the question Subaru's way. She seemed rather proud of herself, but...
Sorry to disappoint, but I have no clue.
No way!
Her prideful front crumbled, allowing her usual expression to come through for a moment. Her imposing attitude had also vanished as she turned to the cat in her palm in a panic.
What now? Did we really just waste our time?
You're wasting time as we speak. You really should hurry. The culprit definitely has the divine protection of wind, considering how fast they ran.
Why are you treating it like it's someone else's problem?
You were the one who told me to stay out of it, though. Besides, what are you going to do about this guy?
Subaru smiled bitterly when once again he became the topic of conversation. The girl seemed as though she now realized he was still there. Subaru put on a brave face for her and stood up.
You've done enough. You're in a hurry, right? You'd better get going.
He'd planned to say this while his fingers combed through his hair and his teeth sparkled. However...
Huh?
You better not try to stare. Too late.
His head felt very heavy and his body was wobbly. He tried to support himself against the wall, but his hand only grasped air. In the end, he had a reunion with the ground he was just recently laying on. He fell completely undefended right onto his nose, the sharp pain making his consciousness drift.
Well, what now?
Well, it's not like we know him. He won't die, so let's leave him be.
As his consciousness faded away, he could make out bits of their conversation. This was a parallel world fantasy, all right, even harsh when it came to kindness. He was going to be abandoned in some alley, a negative viewpoint. Well, he was about to die, so merely being alive was a blessing in itself. A positive viewpoint. These half-hearted thoughts floated across his mind as his consciousness slowly...
Really?
Really?
On the verge of losing consciousness, he caught sight of the girl turning around, her face red.
I definitely won't stick around to help him.
So cute, even when she's angry. A true parallel world fantasy.
Those were his last thoughts before he blacked out.